Next Sunday we're going to begin studying the book of Luke. So today I'm going to wrap up, we're not covering much of what's in Exodus, but going to wrap up Exodus, but the whole idea of this Old Testament study that we've been doing. I said, one of the reasons for studying this is that it gets us acquainted with God. We see the things that God has done in the past, the way he has dealt with things, and it helps us to have a fuller understanding of God. Interestingly, if you follow then the storyline as it progresses, you see that God begins in Genesis 12 with talking to a person, Abraham. And he has this close, intimate relationship with Abraham. At times, he displays some really powerful things. Abraham is at first, it's just conversation between he and Abraham. Then Abraham is kind of doubtful, and he, like us, is saying, God, years are passing and nothing's happening. So in the 15th chapter, God gives him this experience that goes with his promise, and a kind of a darkness falls over the land and over Abraham, and then he does this with this burning pot of fire between the parts of the animals, so that Abraham gets a sense of God's powerful presence. Then hardly any of that with Isaac, except for Isaac as a boy, God's command that he be sacrificed, and then sparing him at the very last moment and providing the sacrifice. Then with Jacob, Jacob is more one that we can identify with, because he has this knowledge of God. He grew up in a household that knows God, but he himself is kind of at a distance from it until God begins to break through to him, and he has this vision at night. Call it a dream, call it whatever, but it's a vision beyond just a dream, and he sees this stairway or ladder going up to heaven and the angels coming and going on it. And then he sees angels several times in his experience. But finally, in his old age, he settles into the same kind of personal relationship with God that Abraham and Isaac have had. So the story of Genesis is God having this personal relationship with chosen people. Then we cross over into Exodus, and we have this 400 years. And I don't think we want to take it that when God says to Moses, I've seen the suffering of my people and I care, that he hasn't cared until then. I think God has watched this. It was his plan that the family, the clans, the 12 tribe leaders would go into Egypt, and there they would multiply into a nation. And it would be a separate nation, because they're in Egypt, they wouldn't be intermingling and becoming part of the changing culture around them with all its idolatry. Now, Egypt had plenty of idolatry, but the Hebrews were sort of separated from it. Then we get to Exodus, and we have God doing this very dramatic thing of calling a nation together, calling them out of Egypt, the 10 plagues and the miracles that Moses and Aaron were given to substantiate the message from God. And then finally, the 10th plague, which we talked quite a bit about, the idea that God was now going to strike Egypt a blow that they couldn't miss in the death of the firstborn. And at the same time, God is still sort of showing this nation his power and his concern. He sort of arranges it so that they find themselves backed up against the Red Sea, with the chariots of Pharaoh coming after them, and God peels back the sea and they cross on dry land, and then he closes on Pharaoh's chariots. And they have this wonderful praise time of realizing that God has dramatically rescued them. And this becomes the beginning of their life with God. From then on, they would be a nation who would remember Passover, would remember God saving them out of Egypt. But they're not a very faithful nation, and though God now is dealing with a nation of people, thousands of people, rather than just a family and individual patriarchs, he finds them, and we should find them, kind of an unfaithful group of his. After the dramatic things he's done, we're most impressed by their how quick their faith fades. So we had in the 10th chapter of Exodus, we had the plagues, and then the 12th, 13th, 14th, we had the elaborate instructions about Passover. Kill the lamb, put the blood on the doorposts, eat bread without yeast, unleavened bread, get ready, be dressed and ready, have all your bags packed, so to speak, and move when God says move. All this is there. And as part of it, God says, now you see that because I have passed over you and saved your firstborn, but I have destroyed the firstborn of Egypt, I'm telling you that from now on, all the firstborn will belong to me. And this becomes a significant awareness of God in their presence. So then, if we followed through Exodus, we have from chapters 15 to 19, it's 3 months' time from the time that they cross over the sea and are free of the Egyptians until they actually get to Sinai. And during that time, God is beginning to communicate with them as a nation. And he communicates with them by letting them have severe problems and seeing to whom they turn. Well, first they turn against Moses. They become bitter and complaining and say, why did you bring us out here to die? There's no water for us. We're a huge group. There's no water. So God provides water. First he cleanses a pond of water of a bitterness in it. And then he has Moses strike the rock, and a river of water comes out of this rock to take care of them. Then they complain, yeah, but we have nothing to eat. So he gives them the daily manna. And they say, yeah, but this is not enough. So he gives them quail. All these things are happening. And yet they don't seem to grasp this deep faith in God, that God is taking care of them. So then we reach the mountain, and we have this very dramatic experience with God. God is telling them, you're to come back to the Mount Sinai where I called Moses. And I'm going to speak to you in a way that you cannot imagine. So he says, 3 days from now, I'm going to come down. I'm going to talk to Moses. I don't want any of you on the mountain. You stay back from the mountain. But I'm going to talk to Moses, and through Moses, I'm going to talk to you. So they wash their clothes. They do what God tells them in preparation. And the third day comes. The mountain is covered with this dark cloud, and there's thunder, and there's lightning, and the mountain is shaking. And the people are very concerned, very scared about this. Now God is saying some very significant things to them at this time. In the 19th chapter, let's see here, I made myself some notes. Verses 3 through 6 of the 19th chapter are very interesting. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." That's a beautiful devotional expression. I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine," do you hear that? "Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Interesting that Peter uses these exact phrases in 1 Peter when he talks to the believers, Jew and Gentile. He says, "You are a holy nation, a royal priesthood." These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything." Now, when I read Lord, it's the capital letters. It's always this personal name of God that it becomes so powerful in Exodus. I am Yahweh. I am who I am. I am the eternal, always God, the only God. So the people said, "We will do everything that Yahweh has said." So Moses brought their answer back to God. Then God said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. The Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." So this is the most dramatic thing, and of course, this is exactly what happens. God calls Moses up, and in our translation, in our recording of it, God gives him the 10 Commandments, and the first time God makes the tablets of stone himself, and he writes the letters on it. Then, but all these 10 Commandments. Now, don't get the idea that the 10 Commandments are the whole law, because we go right on in Exodus then to have lots of more commandments, clarifications, details that must be covered. So Exodus becomes a first book of law in which God lays all this out. And then we get deeper into Exodus, and God says, "I'm making a covenant with you, and I will confirm that covenant." Then Moses is up on the mountain with God, and God gives him all this detailed instruction about how to make this worship tent, this tabernacle, and all the articles that will be in it, exactly how he should make them. So, but Moses is gone a long time for this. Later, it says that he was on the mountain for 40 days and didn't eat or drink, didn't need to all that time. And when he comes down, his face is shining from the presence of God, so that the people are backed off from it. But all these things he gives, and this would be another study, a very interesting study of why God gives these things as he does. But finally then we get to the rest of the story that we know. In chapter 31, God says to Moses, in spite of the fact that I've told you just how to make these things, I'm going to inspire 2 craftsmen, and they are going to know exactly how to make these things. So he has these 2 craftsmen that are inspired by the Holy Spirit to make things just as God wants them. All things after the pattern that was shown you in the mount is the phrase. But then we get to chapter 32, and all of a sudden everything changes. Moses is up there, all this tremendous thing going on, and yet when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Now here's Aaron, who should be co-leader with Moses, who's been himself involved. He takes Aaron with him up on the mountain at one point. And here's Aaron, and the people are saying to him, here we are, we don't know what to do. Moses is gone. As far as we know, he'll never come back. We don't know what happened to him, but he's been gone a long, long time. And so we need gods that we can see, gods that will go before us, gods we can trust in. So, like the Egyptians have gods, we need gods. So we need you to make us a god that we can trust in. So now this is a kind of a mysterious passage, and Aaron, when he explains it, you say, oh, really? But he says to them, take off the golden earrings that you have and the other rings of gold and give them to me. Take off the golden earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing. Bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. And this gold, then, there's a lot of people and a lot of earrings and a lot of gold. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf. Now, why a calf? Because that was kind of the highest level of idolatry in Egypt, the sacred bull. So they made a calf. And he says, in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Now, I don't know whether Aaron himself was this good of a craftsman or whether somebody helped him, but anyway, they made this thing to look a lot like a real calf. And then Aaron says, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Wow, we couldn't go from the high to the low so quickly, could we? God says, I am your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I am here to show you who I am, to be your God, so you can trust in me. And they say, now we need a God we can see, and this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. Now, he uses the word Yahweh. So Aaron, it seems, is trying to pull them back and say, okay, you need a calf, here's your calf, but we're still going to worship the true God. We could do some sermonizing from that. So the next day, the people rose and they brought offerings and offered offerings before this calf. And then they set out to have a festival, to have a happy time. They sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Different translations of this, to dance, to sing, but basically it was a wild party. So the Lord said to Moses, go down because your people whom you brought out of Egypt, this is interesting, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are the gods, plural, of Israel who brought you out of Egypt. Now they're kind of following the Egyptian model that, yes, this calf is the representation, but we realize that there's got to be lots of gods who are involved in this. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses. They are a stiff-necked people. Have you ever been stiff-necked? I have. Now, you can't turn without it hurting. You don't turn. You just stay in one direction. And that seems to be what God means by stiff-necked. They will not turn from what they want or what they see. So now there's this interesting conversation between God and Moses. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. Does God ever say something he doesn't mean? I really think here this is a trial. This is a test for Moses. But Moses sought the favor of Yahweh his God. O Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth. Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Hear that? You promised this to your faithful servants, the patriarchs. You can't change it now. To whom you swore by your own self, I whom you swear by, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them. And it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented. There are places where it says God sort of changed his mind, and yet we say, wait a minute. Other places we're told definitely that God doesn't change his mind. God relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. So Moses then goes down, and he's got these tablets that divinely were made for him with the 10 Commandments. And he meets Joshua, who's his attendant, who's watching for him. And they're going down the mountain, and they hear all this noise. And Joshua says, I hear the noise of people shouting. They're the sounds of war in the camp. And Moses says, not the sound of victory, not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear. So Moses says, I don't like the sound I'm hearing. When he approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hand, breaking them to pieces. Have you wondered about that? It's kind of a dramatic thing. You think, Moses, come on, those tablets God made, and yet he throws them down and breaks them. Kind of you have that sort of biblical, silly idea. Who was the first one to break the 10 Commandments? Moses. Forget it. There's something symbolic about this. Now he goes down and he's got this divine anger. He took the calf they had made and burned it in fire, which would, of course, melt the gold. Then he ground it to powder, scattering it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses is very angry about this. He said to Aaron, what did these people do to you that you led them into such a great sin? Do not be angry, my lord, Aaron answered. You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Yeah. So I told them, whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off. They gave me the gold. Now listen to this. I threw it into the fire, and out came the calf. Aaron, really? Is that your best excuse? Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughing stock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him. Now this will be the tribe that in the law is set aside to be the special servants of God. So he says, take your swords and stop this riot, and they did. So 3,000 people died. It's interesting that on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 people were saved, were baptized, and became the beginning church. Here, 3,000 people are killed. So, next day Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin, but now I will go to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold, but now please forgive their sin. Now listen to this. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written. Moses becomes a little Christ-like in this, doesn't he? He says, no, you can't destroy them and make something just out of me. I would die for them. If you are going to blot them out, you must blot me out too. The Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." Then the Lord struck the people with a plague. So there's very dramatic things happening here in their relationship now with this, between God and this new nation. Then chapter 33, the Lord said to Moses, "Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go to the land I promised on oath. Don't just stay here and live around the mountain for me to take care of you. Go and do what I told you." So, when the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments, for the Lord had said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go down with you even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you." So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. And Moses sets up this tent. Now, my best understanding, this is not the tabernacle itself. This is a separate tent that he calls the tent of meeting, and he goes there to talk to God, and God comes and talks to him. And whenever Moses goes there, this cloud that represents God comes down to the tent, and the people come out and stand in their doorways reverently and watch to see what God is going to say to Moses. So then Moses has this interesting discussion with God. He says, "Okay, you told me to lead these people, but you haven't told me who's going to go with me." And God says, "Well, I'll send an angel." And Moses says, "No, if you're not yourself going with us, I'm not going." And God says, "All right, I will go with you." Then he calls Moses back up to the mountain, and now the second set of tablets are made. And he says to Moses, "You make the tablets, and I will put the words on them." So the first set of tablets God made, the second set Moses made. Is there some kind of parable in that? So then he stays there. Moses chiseled out the 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up the mount early in the morning, as the Lord had commanded him, and he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there. And we have this place where Moses says, "Okay, Lord, show me all of you. Let me see you." And God says, "You can't see me. Anybody who would see me in that way would die." Actually, we're told later that, he's a spirit. You can't see him with fleshly eyes. So God says, "I'll tell you what I'll do. You stand on this rock over here, and I will pass by, and I'll put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand. And after I'm gone by, I'll take my hand away, and you can see my back." Now this is language of not to be taken completely literally, but so all of this is happening, and now Moses repeats the 10 Commandments and adds to them, and they make all of these things that God has said, and we have the rest of the book talking about how they make these things. And then it comes to, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and now the tent of meeting is that tabernacle that they've made. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, wherever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel during all their travels. Then we get to the book of Leviticus, which is more laws and the details of priestly activity. That's why it's called Leviticus, because it's about the priestly tribe. And then we get to the book of Numbers. You remember Pastor Dan had a very interesting series of sermons about the book of Numbers. you get the idea that God is, by things that he did with the patriarchs, he is developing this sense of relationship with people. Now the things that he does with the whole nation develop a sense of companionship. And we have all this detail. And then you get from the book of Numbers to the book of Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy, the older generation have all died off. It's now all the younger generation. They're ready, poised to go into the land. Aaron has died. Miriam has died. Moses is ready to go up on the mountain himself and die. But before he does, he goes over all this again. Deuteronomy literally means the second giving of the law. But actually, it's kind of a summary of all of this from Exodus on. You read, and Moses tells them, because this younger generation weren't actually there seeing it, he tells them everything that happened. And we see the beginning battles that they have, and Moses is told that he can't lead them into the promised land, but Joshua will. So we get to the end of Deuteronomy, and then the book of Joshua takes them into the land, and then the whole history unfolds, and we will get then to the New Testament, and the New Testament begins with God doing something far more practical, dramatic, workable than he did at Mount Sinai, in that he comes in the person of his Son to become a human being, to live among us for a lifetime, a short lifetime, but a lifetime, and show us God in a way that could never be seen, no matter how dramatic these things were at Sinai. Now, I have a couple of texts I want to read as we get to the close of this hour from the New Testament to see why is it important that we know all this. Well, the first one's from the book of Hebrews, the 12th chapter of Hebrews. Remember, the 11th chapter was all that going back and reminding of the great ones of faith that talks about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all of the faithful ones. But in the 12th chapter, he talks about disciplining those who are his sons. He says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. Then we come to verse 18. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken. I didn't actually read that passage, but when God came down and there was this trumpet blast that was sort of ear-splitting and went on, and then God spoke so that they could hear him, and they said, "Oh, Moses, that's enough. We can't deal with the voice of God. Just you let God talk to you, and you tell us what he said." So the Hebrew writers say, to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further words would be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touched the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, "I am trembling with fear." But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks better word than the blood of Abel. He talks about Abel's blood crying from the ground to God. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time the voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So ends the book of Hebrews. Now, 1 Corinthians, Paul has a very interesting passage in the 10th chapter of 1 Corinthians that kind of talks to us about why we're studying this. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the facts, brother, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Now, from this, some get the idea that there was actually a rock that when they went, this rock went with them, and when they struck the rock for water, it was the same rock. It had just moved with them. No, I think he's saying that Christ was with them. God in the person of his Son was with them, and the rock was Christ. This is this idea that you can see in these Old Testament shadows and symbols and things that God was preparing to send his Son. So the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. A little different presentation of that verse, but pretty much the same. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so that you can stand up against it. So Paul takes this whole experience in Exodus and Numbers that we're talking about and makes it a great illustration, a great warning. He goes on to talk to those who were still in a time when they were surrounded by idolatry, and idolatry was their big problem. And he says to them, but they ate the one bread, you eat one bread, because you have that bread of remembrance, and you all take that bread, and it binds you together as believers in Jesus. And you take the cup, and it binds you together as believers. Now he says, you can't take the Lord's cup and the cup of demons as well. So don't be trying to have the best of both worlds. We'll still be believers in Jesus, but we'll see that the world has some really good things out here with its idolatry. So we'll take the best that the world has to offer and the best that Jesus has to offer. Paul says you can't do that. You should have learned that from the experiences of the Israelites in the wilderness. You can't have a calf and God at the same time. So we see that the other text that is interesting is the one where Paul says, our sacrifice, our lamb has been shed. His blood has been shed, and therefore with the bread of righteousness, the bread that's not mixed with the leaven, you should make yourselves a righteous people unto the Lord as he called for his Old Testament people to do. So a lot of these images from the Old Testament are part of our New Testament understanding. And we see the New Testament often going back and drawing on something out of the Old Testament to remind us about how that God is the God, the only God, and that we are his people, and as his people we should be different from the world. Okay, we have a little time. Do you have anything more you want to talk about? Any question? Anything you want me to talk more about or that you want to add? I don't have Ed Knopfinger here to ask me questions, and on Wednesday night I always have my friend Dave, who always has questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes his questions are interesting because he's just grasping a lot of things that we were brought up on, and he will ask a question, and everybody will say to themselves, doesn't everybody know that? No, everybody doesn't know that. So, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do with Luke if you want to begin to read ahead. We're going to look at that first paragraph in which Luke tells us what he's doing and how we are to see this what we call a gospel, this story of Jesus that he's writing. Then we're going to skip to chapter 3 because we're going to save chapters 1 and 2 for December. We're going to study them at the Christmas season as part of our Christmas experience. But we're going to start with chapter 3 because that's where Jesus' ministry begins, and it begins with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is this link to all of the Old Testament material. So we're going to start with John the Baptist, and we're going to look then at Jesus coming to John, receiving John's baptism, being recognized by God as his son, and by John the Baptist recognizing him. And then we're going to move on to follow Jesus as he begins his ministry, and we're going to see, as Luke records it, the things that Jesus did. And it'll be a considerable study because Luke has a lot of wonderful detail that we want to think about. So that's what's ahead for next week.
Yeah.
Okay, any last thoughts about Genesis? Actually, the Jews in Jesus' day, the Sadducees especially, talked about the books of Moses. They meant the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And their idea was that's all there is. The rest of it is just stuff. So they supposedly based their entire relationship with God on those 5 books. The 5 books then that they came to call the Torah, the law. And of course, we see the law as not there in the same way in Genesis that it is in Exodus, but they saw it all as God giving his law, telling us how to live. And their idea was that if we can study this law and live it with perfection, and they thought they did, God will have to be good to us. God will have to take care of us. We have a covenant. God said, if you do this, I will bless you. So we're going to do it, and then God must bless us. Didn't exactly work out that way. So, but often they talk about the Hexateuch, including the book of Joshua, because in a way Joshua is the end of that story that begins with Abraham. And it goes to when they actually take over and own the land that God promised to Abraham. But even then, they don't own all of it. And very quickly, like at the experience of coming out of Egypt, very quickly you get into the book of Judges and you see that they didn't stay with it. When Joshua ends his life, he says, okay, decide who you're going to serve. Are you going to serve the gods of the people around you, or are you going to serve the God who brought us here? As for me and my house, we're going to serve Yahweh. We're going to serve our true God. But you decide who you're going to serve. Well, they had a lot of trouble deciding who they were going to serve. So you have a lot of deterioration. And then we come back to God saying, okay, I will deal with you. And we have him raising up the kings, David especially, and establishing a covenant with David that kind of attaches to the covenant with Moses and becomes then the basis for the New Testament, for Jesus being the Messiah King. And then that deteriorates, and the kingdom deteriorates, and they go into captivity, and they come back from captivity, but they never really seem to get it. God is always looking for, he finds a remnant of people who really have a relationship with him, but he's always disappointed in the larger body. And so now then comes that wonderful time that God is so prepared for, that Luke is going to tell us about, when God approaches humankind in a like way, but a different way. And he comes in the person of his Son, and we see God in John's gospel actually is more of this, but we'll see it in Luke, that God is showing himself in a way that really surpasses the revelation that he gave to Moses or to the prophets or to David. And this is what these writers of the book of Hebrews are seeing, that we have something that far, it's built upon, but it far goes above what the Old Testament foundation laid, and that's where we have our relationship with God. Okay, time is about up. Any last thoughts? Last week when we were having our snacks, Pam says to me, so you're going to study Luke? I said, yeah. She said, I'm ready to study Luke. We've had enough Old Testament. I thought, okay, Pam, I think you're probably speaking for the class. I think we've probably gone through enough of the Old Testament beginnings. It's now time to get to to where we are. So that's what we will do starting next week. Appreciate your staying with me through all of this Genesis and Exodus, and I hope you have found some things in it that basically I'm preaching to the choir, because most of the people in my class have been over this since they were children, and it's not really new to them, and yet I hope I'm kind of taking us over it to see some of the deeper spots in it to think about. Mm-hmm. And prepare us. I trust as we go through Luke, we'll probably have many occasions to look back and see how this connects to where we were earlier. So let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for the time in your word. We thank you for all of your word that you have preserved for us in a very almost miraculous way, that we should have these texts to have in our own homes and to open and read individually and have a personal relationship with you that is kind of like the relationship of the patriarchs. Certainly is personal beyond what we see in the struggles of the nation to be faithful to you. So teach us to be your people. Teach us to understand that summary that the book of Hebrews brings to us, that we are a people who know you in a way that takes us all the way to the end, when you wrap everything up and take your own people to yourself. May we be faithful, may we be students of your word, and give us your blessing and your leading. In Jesus' name, amen.